Welcome to yet another set of notes. Hooray! Today's set of notes is on interactions among living things. So you should have a piece of Cornell note paper in front of you, and our topic/objective today is interactions among living things. Today we have two essential questions we're going to be looking at. So in your essential questions, the first question is, how do an organism's adaptations help it to survive? So what makes it so that they can live? And the second essential question is, what are the major ways in which organisms in an ecosystem interact? What are the different ways that they interact with each other? Okay, so those are your topic, objective, and essential question. Now down into the notes section, I'm going to start with a heading first. And the first heading we're going to look at is adapting to the environment. Okay, adapting to the environment. We're going to start first with the definition for natural selection. Perhaps you've heard about what natural selection is. Maybe you've heard of it in relation to evolution. And what natural selection really means is that those individuals in a species who have unique characteristics that makes it so that they're really suited to their environment are more likely to survive and produce offspring who are also suited to their environment. Okay, so our definition today is individuals whose unique characteristics are best suited for their environment tend to survive and reproduce, and when they reproduce, they're producing offspring who also tend to survive and reproduce. So I'll give you an example. So let's say you have oops, that's really big. Let's say you have a group of giraffes, and they're all trying to survive by eating the leaves on trees. And you have two giraffes that are short, and then you also have a giraffe that is tall. Well, the two giraffes that are short aren't able to reach those high branches and get the leaves and feed themselves. But this guy over here, he's really tall, and he can reach those leaves. So out of these three, this one over here is more likely to survive and then reproduce and have offspring that also survive. And so he's passing off this long neck trait to his offspring, and that's how natural selection evolves. So over time, giraffes end up having longer necks because those with longer necks can reach the higher leaves and live and reproduce. I'm in the middle of a recording. Want to say hi? Just say hi. This is for class. You can say a quick hello.
Mama, we already had a few M&Ms today, so can we have a little bit more? Could Dad so we could have
One more little snack?
Yeah, Dad so we could have.
Okay, I'm going to keep recording, okay? All right.
Who's doing that?
Well, I'm going to put it on my website. Okay, sorry. The next definition we're going to look at is adaptations. So what are adaptations? And adaptations are related to natural selection, so you've probably heard of them before. Adaptations are behaviors and physical characteristics that allow organisms to live successfully. So what are the things that allow them to live successfully? And it's important to note that every organism has a variety of adaptations that allow it to live and survive. So every organism has a variety of adaptations that are suited to its specific living conditions. So I'll give you an example. And the example I'm going to use is an owl. Oops, sorry. And so what are the adaptations of an owl? Well, an owl has large eyes that are set forward on its head to give it depth perception for hunting.
Speaking about owls, we saw whitewash today, and that's owl poop.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for letting me know. So look at this. So owls have those big eyes that give it depth perception for hunting. and their retinas are packed with light-sensitive rods so they can see at night. Their necks have a lot of flexibility for them to follow prey as they move. They have sharp talons for catching prey on the fly. And their wings make it so that they're very silent when they're flying.
The feathers are really, really soft.
Oh, it says totally silent flight from fringe flight feathers that muffle the sound of air passing through their feathers, which is really, really cool.
Ew, not a lot in here.
That's okay. So those are the adaptations of an owl, and those are the behaviors and physical characteristics that allow them to live successfully. Does that make sense, girls? Okay, I'm gonna keep.
I already know all that.
You do? Okay, I'm gonna keep going with my recording. You gonna go back outside? Okay. I love you. You too? Make me feel so good. Okay. Next.
You too.
Okay, thank you.
You too.
Our next definition is the word niche. What is a niche? A niche is basically the job of an organism. So if we talk about a habitat as an organism's home, the niche is what it does to, I'm making a recording, honey, is the role of the organism in its habitat, how it makes its living. What is the job of an organism? And I have a little picture to show you that highlights what a niche is. And here we have a little beaver, a bunch of little beavers, and they're working on their beaver dam. So that's their role. Their role in their habitat is to build dams and to chop down trees. And that's the niche of a beaver. Okay, so now we've covered how organisms adapt to the environment and what they do in their environments, looked at natural selection, adaptations, and niche. And now we're going to have another heading in our notes, and that's going to be interactions. Okay, so now that we understand a little bit about organisms individually, well, how are they interacting with each other? So here we have interactions. And there are three major types of interactions among organisms. So I'm going to put this here. Three major types of interactions among organisms are competition, predation, and symbiosis. And symbiosis is a little bit more involved. So in our books, it talks about 5 types of interactions. Well, that's because symbiosis has 3 interactions of its own. First, we're going to talk about competition now. Okay, so competition is the struggle between organisms to survive as they attempt to use the same limited resource. So sometimes this could include organisms of the same species, but it could also include organisms of different species. Okay, so the struggle between organisms to survive as they attempt to use the same limited resource. One of the things I like to think about is in the Amazon rainforest, like the trees are really, really tall and you have that canopy that's way up. Well, organisms that need light really need to compete in order to survive. They have to be really tall because there's so many plant species close together. In order to get enough light, they have to be able to get way, way, way up above that canopy. So that's one kind of competition. And here for our graphic that I'm going to use for your notes today, I have some elk, and they're competing probably for a mate. They would fight off each other in order to decide who gets to mate with the female elk, and that's another type of competition. But there are also competition between species as well. Next, we're going to look at predation. Predation. Predation is an interaction in which one organism kills another for food. Okay, so it's specifically about killing for food, not because they're just angry at them. And I have an example here. There's a bear. I thought this was a cool photo. A grizzly bear catching a fish. And so that is an example of predation. And it's important to note that the predator is the organism that kills another organism for food, and the prey is the organism that that is killed. Well, so the predator is the organism that kills another for food. It's important to note that predators have adaptations to help them catch and kill their prey. So if you look back to the owl up here, well, we looked at the adaptations of the owl that allow it to kill its prey. The eyes, so they can see them and see them at night. Their necks are flexible so they can look around for prey. They have sharp talons, and they have wings that are quite silent when they're flying. So those are some examples of adaptations that predators have. The prey is the organism that is killed for food by another. And just like predators have adaptations to kill their prey, prey have adaptations to help them avoid being killed. And I've given a couple of examples here of the sort of adaptations prey might have. An example would be mimicry, so they can sound like something else, coloring, camouflage. So some coloring might be, they have, say it's an insect that has bright red on it, which a lot of the times in the wild, things that are bright red are poisonous. So that might be a warning to something that might normally eat an insect not to eat it because maybe it's poisonous because it's bright red. And there are other things that are camouflage that helps them avoid being seen. It's also important to note that predation plays a major role in the size of populations. And so remember, we talked about the two main ways. The main way organisms enter a population is by birth, and the main way they exit the population is by death. And oftentimes that death is because of predators. So predation plays a major role in the size of populations. And I want to give you an example here. So here we have, here we have a hare that has been killed by a lynx. So in this example, again, the predator is the lynx and the prey is the hare. And I have an interesting little graphic here to show populations of hares and lynxes over time. And as you can see, when the lynx population goes up, when the hare population goes up, and when the hare population dips, as does the lynx population. If the lynx are relying on the hare for food, and if the hare is scarce, then the lynx are going to have to be scarce as well. Either they've gone somewhere else to get food, or they're dying off because they don't have enough of the resource they need. Okay. Next, let's talk about symbiosis. Symbiosis. What is symbiosis? It's a weird word. You might have heard of like symbiotic relationships before. A lot of people actually use symbiosis incorrectly in talking about it. They always seem to think it's a positive thing. Some symbiotic relationships are quite positive, but not always, as we'll see very soon. So symbiosis, oh, I'm having trouble here. I apologize. Stick with me, guys. Symbiosis is a close relationship between two species that benefits at least one of the species. So remember, at least one of the species, meaning that the other one isn't necessarily benefiting from the relationship. And the three types of symbiotic relationships are mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. And we did talk about parasitism when we were watching the video, the Scientific American Frontiers video that included the brown tree snakes and the birds on Guam, and then that weed that was growing in the Mediterranean and the little snails, or the slugs, I'm sorry, the slugs that were eating them. But let's talk about each of these relationships. The first is mutualism. And the mutualism is a positive thing. Mutualism is a relationship in which both species benefit. So both of them are getting something from the relationship, and they're both happy. So I've given an example here of a hippopotamus. And the hippopotamus has a bunch of birds on its back. So the birds that are on the hippopotamus are called oxpecker birds, which is a really hilarious name, I realize. And if I just saw this picture and I didn't realize what was going on, I might be like, oh, that poor hippo has all these birds pecking away at it. Well, the birds are actually eating parasites off of the hippo. So like bugs and other things that are living on the hippo that aren't doing the hippo any good, the birds eat them off, and so the birds are getting a little meal and the hippo is being cleaned. Additionally, which is really, really super amazingly cool, is that the birds act as an alarm system for the hippopotamus. So if a predator is coming for the hippo, the birds will fly up and see the predator and make these really obnoxious sounds to warn the hippo that they need to leave the area. So it's a really, really cool relationship in which they're both benefiting. So again, the hippo's getting some protection from predators and also getting the bugs and parasites eaten off of it. And the birds are getting a nice little meal. And I don't know if the hippo serves as any protection for the birds, but that's also a possibility. So that's mutualism. The next relationship we're going to look at is something called commensalism. And commensalism is a relationship in which one species benefits and the other species isn't helped, but it isn't harmed either. It's kind of like a non-entity. So I have a little example here. I thought I had an example of a turtle. I'm going to have to find a picture and show you later, but an example would be a turtle that has barnacles on it, on its shell. Like the barnacles are getting a free ride and are able to like filter out microorganisms for its meals, but the turtle isn't bothered at all. The barnacles aren't hurting it, but they're not being helped by the barnacles either. The barnacles aren't doing anything for the turtle, but they're not harming them either. And I do have another example, but I actually, when I found this, I was under one impression, and now I actually know a little bit something different about it. And it was the relationship between a clownfish and a sea anemone. So the clownfish live in the sea anemone, and are protected by it because most organisms can't go near one without getting stung. And I thought, okay, so the clownfish are benefiting, but the sea anemone is not. But I read somewhere that the clownfish actually do clean the sea anemone, and so it benefits from it. So this is actually more of a mutualism relationship. But I guess some people still consider it commensalism. So I don't know. I don't know how much benefit the sea anemone gets from the clownfish, but I do know that the clownfish really does benefit from the sea anemone. Okay, and the last symbiotic relationship we're going to discuss is parasitism, which we did talk about a little bit last week after we had watched the video. So parasitism involves one organism living on or inside another organism and causing it some sort of harm. So living where we live, we're very familiar with a couple of parasites. One is a tick. So here's a tick on a person. They get a meal from the person, and the person gets its blood taken away and possibly gets some sort of terrible disease like Lyme. And another example I have of parasitism. Ava, can you let the doggy out? Can you go outside with her? I'm almost done, okay?
Mama, I'm not supposed to open the garage.
What?
I'm not supposed to open the garage because Dad's building and I don't want to go down there.
Okay, don't. Can you wait a couple minutes?
I have to go down there.
Bring the dog with you.
In the car.
Okay, so another example of parasitism would be a mosquito on a person. Again, the mosquito is getting a meal and the person is getting its blood taken away. And depending on where you live, if you live in a place that has triple E or West Nile virus or malaria, the person could potentially get something a lot worse than just an itchy bug bite. I mentioned the other day in class that half of all human deaths since the beginning of time have been due to mosquitoes. So these guys really are pretty terrible for the human race in general. And when we're talking about parasitism, again, one organism living on or inside another and harming it, it's important to note the players in a parasitic relationship. You have the parasite. You have the parasite, which is the organism that actually lives on or in the other organism and causes the harm. And you have the host, and the host is the organism on which or in which the parasite lives. Okay, so the parasite is the organism that lives on or in another organism and causes that other organism some type of harm. And it doesn't even have to be like hugely harmful, but any type of harm would make it a parasitic relationship. And the host is the organism that has another organism living in or on it, causing some type of harm. And those are all our notes for today. So let's go back to the beginning real quick. Again, our topic and objective is interactions among living things. We talked about how organisms adapt to the environment. And there's something called natural selection, meaning that over time in a species, those particular individuals in the species who have characteristics that makes them better suited to their environment and more likely to live, it means that they're more likely to live and reproduce and produce offspring with those same traits, those same beneficial traits, just like this giraffe with a long neck. Adaptations are specific to individual organisms and their behaviors and characteristics that allow them to live successfully. And we talked about the owl. We discussed niche, which is the role of an organism, how it makes its living. And then we looked at interactions. We looked at competition, predation, and symbiosis. So competition, I think you have a pretty good idea of what that is. If you've ever played a sport, you know what competition is. We talked about predation and predator-prey relationships and how predator-prey relationships affect population sizes. And we looked at the lynx and the hare. And then we talked about symbiosis and the three types of symbiosis. Mutualism, where both species benefit. Commensalism, where one species benefits and the other is neither helped nor harmed. And then parasitism, where one organism lives in or on another and harms it. And we discussed that parasites are the organisms that live on or in another, and the hosts are the ones that have the parasite living in or on them. And that's all. I hope you enjoyed the notes today. I apologize for the few interruptions. And please don't forget to do your summaries. Thanks so much.